Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Welcome to this webinar, the second in the series hosted by ISO Technical Committee 347, Data-Driven Agri-Food Systems. My name is Andres Ferreira, the chair of TC 347, and I'll be your moderator for today's session. This series is designed to explore key technical areas where standardization can support innovation, sustainability, and data interoperability in agri-food systems. Today's topic, smart irrigation, is a critical area that seeks to optimize the use of irrigation water, a critically important and diminishing resource. ISO TC 347 is a new and ambitious committee that's working to develop international standards that enable trustworthy, inclusive, and effective use data across agri-food systems. This webinar is part of our commitment to transparency, engagement, and inclusive participation in the standards development process. Regarding goals for the session, today we aim to introduce key technical insights related to the topic of smart irrigation, to highlight how this topic connects to standardization opportunities, and to show you how you can actively participate in shaping upcoming international standards. This session is being recorded and will be made available after the webinar. Please feel free to post your questions in the Q&A box or in the chat. We'll address as many as we can during the Q&A segment at the end, and we'll try to email you answers to the questions you posed in the Q&A after the webinar. If the questions are easy, I'll probably answer them on the fly as well. Regarding our speakers, we're very fortunate to be joined today by Dr. Wenyang Wu and Dr. Charles Hillier, who will lead us through today's discussion. So let me briefly introduce them. Dr. Wenyang Wu is a professor and deputy director in the Department of Irrigation and Drainage in the China Institute of Water Resources and Hydropower Research, IWHR. He initiated the initiative in TC 347 that led to the proposing standardization for optimizing the use of water and the data that leads to decision making in water. Dr. Charles Hillier is the director of the Center for Irrigation Technology, CIT, at the California State University in Fresno. He has over 20 years of experience developing software systems and tools for agriculture, with most of that time focused on irrigation management and deficit irrigation. He also works on international standards development and serves as project leader for the ISO 7673 series of standards in ISO TC 23 Subcommittee 19, Agricultural Electronics, and is head of the U.S. delegation to ISO TC 23 Subcommittee 18, Irrigation Equipment. He has been very involved in all the previous work that ISO has done on data interoperability in irrigation management, and is very well positioned to participate and co-lead this work, building new tools on top of that. So also want to mention that CIT is built on a foundation of innovation and technology transfer focused on testing, applied research, and entrepreneurship to support developing and deploying technologies that will bring the world the most innovative products and resource management tools. So with that, I'll now hand things over to Dr. Charles Hillier and Dr. Wenyang Wu to begin the presentation. Gentlemen, the floor is yours.
Great. Well, welcome everyone. Thank you for inviting us here today, Andres. Here's a quick overview of what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to examine why we need smart irrigation standards, and I'll be explaining that through a case study from some work we did in the Pacific Northwest. Then Dr. Wu is going to show us some detailed examples about a pilot project from Northwest China, which demonstrates the benefits of smart irrigation. We're going to talk very briefly about some existing work that's been done, and then you will hear about what we're proposing to do in TC 347. And I will begin with a case study that we're calling the NEA case study. NEA is the Northwest Energy Efficiency Alliance. They're a nonprofit organization that operates in the Columbia Basin in Oregon, Idaho, and Washington. And they funded a study quite a few years ago to demonstrate what smart irrigation can do. And it had several objectives. You can see them there. They were looking at motivating adoption of energy efficient technologies, particularly in the field of irrigation. And the overall goal of this project was to demonstrate what's the absolute best you could do with irrigation efficiency if you had all of the technology that was available at the time. So they wanted to motivate adoption of this technology, and they were using the economic benefits, the resource management benefits that could develop or that could be produced by adopting these technologies and using them. And it was fairly complex. So we established some different levels of technology that would sort of guide our analysis. Level 0 was essentially the conventional practice. That was what growers in the region were doing now. They had access to a very long-lived agricultural weather network that would provide them water use information. And then we had 3 different technology levels in our demonstration and study. The first one was basically having an on-farm weather station, as well as monitoring flow, soil moisture, and energy use. The second level, or level 2, involves spatially explicit understanding of the irrigation needs. And so that incorporated some very detailed soil mapping and yield mapping to verify the results. And the level 3, sort of the best that you could absolutely do, included all of the level 1, 2, and 2, but also included variable rate irrigation. This is a technique for pivots where you can spatially distribute the water based on the spatial need. So this is a sort of an overview of the system that we deployed at several different locations. You can see the 3 levels represented by these 3 different boxes. So the level 1 was basic scientific irrigation scheduling, or SIS. Then we had spatially explicit analysis, and then finally spatially explicit management. All of that was done with a variety of soil moisture probes, in-field sensing of micrometeorological variables, as well as remote control and telemetry for the entire system. So we had wireless control for pumping plants, as well as an online advisory system that was taking all of this data and turning it into optimal deficit irrigation management scenarios. Now, we replicated this study at 3 locations in Oregon, Washington, and Idaho. And we were doing this on actual farms. So these were not research farms. These were practicing farms in the region. And we looked for farms that had high pumping lift, so they had significant energy costs. The farms need to have irrigation managers that are willing to try something new, because a lot of these technologies were new to these growers. We also had to have a manager who was willing to act on the recommendations that were being produced by this integrated decision-making system. It had to be substantial in size, so 200 hectares or greater. And they had to meet the geographic distribution that was relevant for the funder, NEA, which in this case was the Columbia River Basin. So we had all of the best technology that you could get. We had it all integrated or almost integrated on single farms. And we spent 3 years trying to use this technology, had all of this technology all in the same group of farms. And we were set to find out what's the absolute best that you could do in terms of irrigation efficiency if you had all of these tools. It was a fantastic opportunity to demonstrate the value of all of these technologies. So after 3 years, what we concluded was that the absolute best you can do, the answer to that question is no, you can't. Now, the picture you see in front of you, that small animal there, is a beaver. And when I was working on this project, I was working at Oregon State University, and their mascot was a beaver. And if you're not aware, beavers tend to cut down trees and make dams. And this unfortunate beaver has been hurt by the tree that he was trying to cut down to make a dam. And that's kind of what happened to us. And I'm going to show you some simple calculations to demonstrate why this was a problem. So that figure you see on the right is an example of one of the farms we were working on. They have 32 quarter-mile pivots. They have full control over these pivots with the remote telemetry system, so they can start and stop the pivots anywhere. They had robust soil moisture monitoring, a weather station, pump controls, and remote telemetry for all of their systems. Now, if you had all of that stuff, you would need to get data from the weather stations. You would need to get data from the soil moisture measurements. You would need to get the irrigation history from the pivot control system. But all of these systems are separate. We had all of these different instrumentation packages and systems all used on the same farm, but each one of these platforms that had the different data streams that we were using in this process, they were separate silos, which meant that every time we wanted to generate an irrigation recommendation, we had to copy information from one silo into the other, and then copy paste and copy paste and copy paste. But by the end of the third year, we were able to do this in about 3 minutes per field, which meant that if we wanted to do the whole farm, it would take us 96 minutes a day in order to do this type of irrigation scheduling. And a lot of that time is spent just moving data around. So this farm, to give you some perspective, was spending an hour a week doing their irrigation management, and they were doing a very good job of it. So the main thing that we learned from doing this study was that in order to actually take advantage of all of this great technology, the technology has to be integrated together. And it's mainly because of the time it takes to integrate all of this data. And that was the key thing that we learned, and that was the key motivator for several follow-on projects, one of which you'll hear about later today. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Dr. Wu, and he is going to start telling you about a smart irrigation pilot project in North China. Dr. Wu?
Dear friends, I'd like to introduce a case study on a smart farming pilot project in North China. This project is started from 2020 and funded by Ministry of Science and Technology. The objective is to demonstrate data-driven irrigation technology to farmer productivity and use less water to produce more yield, and also to demonstrate different smart irrigation modes related to drip irrigation, sprinkler irrigation, and canal irrigation, and also find solutions to barriers of data transmission for standard. As you know, smart irrigation is a great change compared to traditional irrigation. For traditional irrigation, farmers observe weather, soil, and crops and make decisions based on experience. So for smart irrigation, more equipment or device to use to monitor plant growth, cannabis multiple spectrum data or inside soil moisture. So use this data to analyze and to give a decision to operate equipment. For smart irrigation, I think there are 4 technologies, including phenotype, sensory, decision-making, and control. Phenotype technology, water-sensitive models established based on metadata of plant and spectrum, also inside monitoring data. And for sensoring technology, water stress map was generated by the water-sensitive model to deliver data to decision-making model. Then, by the decision-making model, the irrigation prescriptions map is generated for control. And also, the control result will feedback to phenotype as a data, and then the water-sensitive model will be improved step by step. And how to drive an irrigation system with data, I think there are 4 important sides. The first one is lead to higher irrigation reliability in water distribution and matching by data. The second is to lead to a higher irrigation efficiency and to decrease irrigation precipitation with accurate water supply. And the second one is to lead to higher irrigation uniformity, and to in smart irrigation, variable water supply can be carried out and to get higher uniformity. Final is to get optimized water and fertilizer and make a good coupling for crop growth. In this project, we have set 4 demonstration engineering. such as smart spherical irrigation in Hubei province and a smart canal irrigation in the Mongolian province, a smart drip irrigation for corn in Gansu province, and a smart drip irrigation for wheat in Xinjiang province. Today, I'd like to introduce details on smart irrigation in Xinjiang province. In the phenotype step, we use UAV and remote sensing data to analyze the water and the phenotype and yield relation, and establish water stress index model. And also, we found that in this figure, the GWDRVI index is in the highest value, which introduces the higher yield in harvest. It demonstrated that this index has a good relation with yield, also with soil moisture. In sensory steps, we use water stress model to generate water stress map. In this map, you can find out it's a very difference in different blocks. And then we use a decision-making model to generate irrigation prescription map, and use this prescription map to calculate the irrigation water demand for each blocks. And also we development fertigation equipment or water source control equipment to supply water precision. Also software, fertigation control software. So what is the benefit from data-driven irrigation? We monitoring data of plant growth and soil moisture and crop yield. We monitoring the plant health. The smart irrigation can introduce higher plant health, more than 20% higher than traditional irrigation. Also, we monitoring canopy coverage. It is about 10% compared to traditional irrigation. And for yield, smart irrigation have highest yield, about more than 30% higher than traditional irrigation. I think it is a result from the optimal water supply and also optimal water and fertilizer coupling lead to the higher yield compared to traditional irrigation. And also for water use efficiency, smart irrigation leads to more than 2.6 kilogram cubic water, increase 27% compared to traditional irrigation. And now I'm also want to introduce 2 examples about the standardization. As you know, for a large irrigation district, the main canal, they have different levels of canals, such as main canal, branch canal, and for traditional irrigation, we carry out a fixed rotation, and we deliver water for branch canal one by one. But for smart irrigation, we carry out adaptive rotation. The irrigation blocks depends on the water deficit. So we have to resolve the problem. We how to organize different equipments or device in different canals. So very important things to manage it. It's water distribution under smart irrigation. The conflict is adaptive rotation is a desire for a better water use efficiency, and the equipment communication cannot interoperate enough to execute adaptive irrigation decision. So the problem is the canal topology is complex, and the device cannot carry out fixed rotation irrigation control with current control system. So if we did a standardization, it can mediate the errors of data transmission from sensoring, decision making, and operation. So there are 3 benefits. The standardized device configuration data will enable effective management of water distribution and device operation. And the different manufacturer and software companies use the same standard data format. Then it makes it possible to establish a smart irrigation system with the equipment from different manufacturers and companies. Then the standardization will result in adaptive rotation irrigation is realized. Also, irrigation efficiency improved. Irrigation operation expense are reduced because less labor input and less water used. The next example is the terminal device data program. For smart irrigation, we usually carried out cloud, edge, and the terminal control device, a different level data transmission system. And for traditional irrigation system, we provide time control. And for intelligent irrigation decision model, provide variable water supply data to a terminal control device, such as valves and gates in different blocks. And the current data exchange capability and control algorithms make remote system control very difficult. So the most important problems is the manufacturer of terminal device, control device have their own format and data dictionary. And also it is a hard-coded control algorithm. So it is a barriers for data transmission in the smart irrigation system. So if we set up standards, we can mediate the barriers of data transmission, and the terminal device provide functions both timing control and variable control. And also different manufacturer can have the same standard data format, and then it is easier to construct a smart irrigation system. And also for the standardization, it will make irrigation efficiency improve, and also water and fertilizer loss reduced, and water demand and the supply reaches balance to get higher yield and higher output for farmers.
Thank you,
Okay.
Dr. Wu. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the existing ISO standards that are relevant to smart irrigation. First of those is a project that I've been involved in for quite a few years. The 7673 is basically the end of or not the end, but sort of the current state of the work that evolved out of that NIA project that we mentioned in the Pacific Northwest. The 7673 series is a group of 3 standards in ISO that are moving through. They're currently at the FDIS stage. The first one in that series is 7673-1, which seeks to provide an industry-wide data model. The data model is sort of the underlying goal of the entire series, because that data model gives us the foundations for unambiguous data exchange across the agri-food industry. Next up in that is part 2, which is focused on observations and measurements. These aren't just relevant to irrigation, they're observations and measurements that are relevant across the entire ag value chain. But it helps define what is an observation and a measurement, and how to encode that information, and it provides a set of semantic resources that you can use to very specifically state what an observation and measurement is. Part 3 is irrigation operations. This is the part that is directly relevant to smart irrigation. It incorporates both parts 1 and 2. It relies on them quite heavily to present a data model that is capable of reporting when and where water was applied, where it should be applied, and where it will be applied. It also incorporates fertigation and chemigation and allows you to document when and how much products were applied to a field. Now, there is another series in ISO 21622, which has a very clearly focused part on interoperability, and it addresses some of the similar topics that 7673-3 addresses. 21622 is more directly relevant to the problems that Dr. Wu was demonstrating, where there's an integration of canal operations and on-farm operations and instrumentation. 21622 also includes a lot more hardware requirements for communication and power management. and power use. And part 3, as with 7673, parts of 2162 are still in development. Dr. Wu, you had originally
Yes.
brought this meeting together, and you had a proposal for this work in TC 347.
Yes, we are proposing the ad hoc group in the TC 347. This group will produce a concept framework for understanding smart irrigation as a form of data-driven decision making, and also help us understanding all the existing standards inadequate and identify specific standards that the industry needs. Then through the standards, we can make the data transmission is easier between different system and different equipments to get higher yield, higher output for farmers. Also, in the carrying out of the ad hoc group, we will prepare ISO technical report on this ad hoc group on smart farming. And also this ad hoc group will produce NWIPs and draft standard identified in the technical report.
So to wrap this all together, as Dr. Wu demonstrated, smart irrigation provides a way to better manage water shortages. Dr. Wu showed us some very clear quantitative benefits of applying all of this together at a regional and local scale. But as the NIA examples show, that these benefits are only available when the technology works together. That is, when the technology is fully integrated, not just at the hardware level, but at the decision-making level. And standards will make this integration easier, especially the data part. And making that integration happen makes the entire ag value chain more profitable and hopefully less time-consuming. And this is really important because water is precious. We're seeing global water shortages in groundwater and surface water, and standards can help us use this technology to use the water more wisely. With that, I'll hand it back over to Dr. Ferreira, who will tell you about how you can get involved in TC 347 and this proposed ad hoc group.
Thank you, Charles. Thank you, Wenyang. You've really done a great job showing a lot of exciting things in a short time. So about TC 347, the ISO technical committee that will host this work that we're discussing. In TC 347, most of the work happens online. We have 2 plenary meetings per year. That is when everybody gets together. And one of those is online, and they happen in October. And they're 2 half days over Zoom. Very, very packed agenda where we try to have everyone sort of catch up with what else is going on. And then we have 1 in-person meeting with some hybrid participation. And those are scheduled in March, and they involve 4 days. We had our first one in Berlin on March of this year, and it was fantastic. Someone described it to me as a once-in-a-lifetime networking opportunity. So I hope you can join us next year, where it will also happen in Germany. That's not going to always be the case, but it will be there next year as well. Most of the work, like I said, happens online, but it doesn't happen in the plenary. There's interesting work in the plenary, but most of the work is done in working groups, ad hoc groups, and advisory groups. And there's 2 ways of contributing to TC 347. One is through your national standards body. So each country has a national standards body that manages that country's participation in committees of the International Organization for Standardization. If you join through that route, you can participate directly in any work, and you can help your country's national standards body vote on the different initiatives that are presented. A second way of participating is through a liaison organization. We have, at this time, I think, 9 or 10 liaison organizations like Ag Gateway, AEF, the International Society of Precision Agriculture, and a few more. You can also participate if you're a member of one of those organizations and they present you as a liaison representative. You can participate directly in work that way. You don't vote, but that's a minor issue. So what I would ask you to do as you seek to know more, please contact us. We have an email address, which is at info@isotc347.org, or you can email me directly. We have a LinkedIn page, and we have an ISO page as well. So thank you very much, and I want to maximize the time that we have for questions. We had 3 questions that were presented through the Q&A. So the first was, will the presentation files be distributed? Yes, they will. Just give us a few days and we'll email you the presentation file. Second, one for Dr. Wu. Can you please elaborate on the water stress and fertigation stress map? How did you get them and how often do you use this? The answer was that you suggest doing this every 5 days if you have drones, and maybe more often, depending, I guess, on the crop, right, and the conditions. Then the other question from the same person was wondering if there are any mobile apps for smart irrigation that are easily accessible for farmers. And so Dr. Wu says that his group is developing apps on irrigation decision-making, also apps to control devices. The major equipment manufacturers all have their own apps as well. One of the problems is that they don't really talk to one another, right? So having mixed fleets makes it very difficult. Then we have 3 more. There are different ways of measuring ET and soil moisture. How do you standardize these if the scale is also different? And I'll pass that one to Charles. I know that you've battled ET many times.
So in my opinion, there's always going to be multiple ways to measure evapotranspiration, and they're going to have pluses and minuses, pros and cons. To standardize on one of them, I think would be a disservice. One of the things standards should not do is pick winners. So if we're going to have some sort of a standardization that normalizes evapotranspiration methods, we need to have some way to compare the methods in a standard way. We need to be able to communicate what the ET is. We need to be able to communicate what the circumstances were where the ET was calculated and measured, but we don't need to standardize which method is best. I think the goal here for standardization is to create a level playing field where all of these different methods can be used either separately or in combination, but not to choose which one is the best.
Thank you very much. We also have another comment from the same person saying water use efficiency is used incorrectly. It should be water productivity as kilograms per cubic meter. So I guess somewhere we talked about water use efficiency in terms of output of the crop per input of water. I guess that's another great thing that needs to be standardized, right? Let's see, we have another question. Hello, Dr. Wu. How many sets of soil moisture sensors did you install in your Xinjiang field? What is the threshold value to trigger irrigation?
Yes, in the pilot project, we installed one soil moisture sensor. It covers about 500 square meter because it is experiment research. Maybe it is more higher density in soil moisture. But I think in practice for farmers, it should be less than this intensity because we should use more data from UAV and also coupling with satellite remote sensing data. Yes, the soil moisture is just used to calibrate the model, what stress models.
Thank you. We have a question from Asahiko Yamada saying he can't imagine the boundary between the TC where the 7673 series are standardized and the TC347 where the new ad hoc group is proposed. Actually, that's very simple. We have an excellent relationship with Agricultural Electronics where that was developed. They're on board with this happening. We've communicated very well. We do have an agreement that for all the controlled vocabularies that emerge, we will use the same maintenance agency, the same mechanism for managing code lists and other semantic resources as they're using in the 7673 series. So we're working together to build the same compatible system. So they're happy with this.
Andres, I would also like to point out that this unclarity, if you will, about the boundaries, 7673 is not the only standard that's going to have that issue. There are a couple of other standards in ISO that are going to have that same sort of blurry boundary, and figuring that out in TC347 is going to help those standards as well.
And a really good criterion for figuring those things out is where are the people, right? When you're trying to standardize something within ISO, you need to ask yourself, where are the people that know about this, and where's the technical committee where these things are in scope, right? So in general, where you go from standardizing the hardware to standardizing considerations about interoperability and usage, that's where you'll go from a technical committee to TC347. So, Dr. Wu, are there any considerations for standardizing the frequency of UAV missions, since solar radiation can affect the quality of UAV imaging in terms of like solar angle, for example?
Yes, for UAV, it is a problem that is limited to the sunlight. It can only operate it 3 hours each day. So I think this problem will be solved because we found a solution to use a polarization camera to solve this problem to couple with multiple spectral camera. Then we can increase from 3 hours to 10 hours. So it is a solution in the future. I think UAV operation time will last it. Also, for farmers, I think you should not cover all area. We can use a sampling method to decrease the flying time. Then you can increase the sampling frequency and also cover more a larger area.
And manage the drone's power as well. I've used sampling approaches to doing things like stand count with drones, and that really works quite well. Let's move on to the next question. I think we have time for about 3 more quick questions. One from the chat. How is the information of today used by farmers? Let's imagine that might mean how can these things that we talked about be usable by farmers? And I guess how much do they cost also?
The study that we did with NIA was quite expensive. I think this was over 10 years ago that we did the work. The variable rate irrigation system that we installed on the pivots was $30,000 in addition to the cost of the pivot. They were quite expensive. I understand that the cost has come down a bit since then, but it was quite expensive back then. But some of the soil moisture sensors were $50 or less in some cases per sensor.
So how do you think that standardization will help lower the cost?
I think standardizing the data flow such that data-driven decision-making becomes more possible is going to increase the size of the market, right? And so by increasing the size of the market, the cost of production goes down. That's the sort of the cost driver and the long-term cost driver for smart irrigation, is that as demand goes up, there'll be more motivation to produce more of these things, and so the per unit cost will go down.
Okay, and I think that also wrapping into it, I'm about to say Vicky Arianti's question about the human and AI balance. I guess there has to be a way into using this technology that's sort of gradual. As you, Charles, had that big arrow that had different levels of successive automation, right? Where at the beginning, it's mostly the human bringing together some data, and then in the later stages, there's greater and greater automation. What would you imagine as the first step for a farmer who wanted to start using data to manage irrigation decisions?
I think understanding the data is always the first step. So being familiar with it, being able to recognize what actions you can take based on the data that you're seeing. Because the first encounter that you have is often going to be just the data itself, not the decisions that are produced by the data. And getting your own familiarity with how to understand the data and what to do with it is going to make you more adept at choosing a tool that will make those decisions for you or assist you in making those decisions.
Okay. Dr. Wu, in your experience, how long will it take to synchronize all sensors and mechanical structures so they can be operated smoothly according to plan?
Yes, I think in my research, I suggest you use less sensor to get a higher accuracy model, because if you use many sensors, the equipment must be very expensive, I think. So in my research, I use less expensive UAV to get multiple spectral data and also temperature difference data. Then we use phenotype index to get a good solution and a good relation with water and plant yield. We found that there are many index just like green renormalized different vegetables vegetations index, or just like normalized NIR index. Many index is very close relation with soil moisture and plant growth.
You bring up the really interesting matter of the balance between
Yeah.
Sensors and remote sensing, right?
Yes,
Sensors
yes.
being a great way to get information that's really driving things like weather variables or soil water content. But then again, sensors also create points of failure, and their configuration is typically managed poorly, thus creating data quality issues. On the other hand, remote sensing has calibration issues that make that portability of methods be somewhat difficult. So the balance between these two is where the magic is, I guess. One of the things we're trying to do with standardization is, on one hand, make things like configuration management for sensors simpler and standardized, and on the other, have standardized nomenclature and other ways of better managing remote sensing data as well. With that, we're at the end of our time. Thanks everybody for participating in this webinar. Thank you for your excellent questions. Again, thank you to our panelists. I think your presentation was excellent. So with that, have a great rest of your day.